Okay, welcome to Arif Shabbat Parashat class, Parashat Vayhi, the mystique of Kever Rachel, the famous grave site of Rachel Imenu, visited by hundreds of thousands annually, a place of supplication, of prayer, of hopes and aspirations, and something that's become modern times one of the most popular stopping place for tourists, even Jewish and non-Jewish alike. Where has this mystique emanated from? Let's explore what the origins are of Kever Rachel and really the insights of the great Yaakov Avinu in originally burying his wife in this area, and then in our parasha, revisiting that episode and conveying a certain message to his son Yosef. So we pick it up, Parashat Vayhi, towards the beginning, Perek Memchet, chapter 48. And we can start from about Pasuk He or Vav, where Yaakov Avinu was on his deathbed. Yosef ran over to see him with his sons. And Yaakov informed Yosef that Hashem had appeared to him, blessed him, and he told him that I'm going to expand you into a great nation. Not only that, likhal amim, to a congregation of nations. That has to do with the formation of tribes, a class that we had on this parasha a few years ago. And I'm going to give you this land for inheritance. And your two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, of course, uniquely will have a portion equal in Eretz Yisrael as a tribe equal to the rest of my sons, even though they're my grandsons. And then in Pasuk Zayin, as Yaakov is speaking to Yosef and informing him of what is to be a great historical prediction for Am Yisrael, he digresses and decides to tell the following to Yosef. Ve'ani bebu'i padan meta alai Rachel be'eretz Canaan baderech. And as I was leaving Padan Aram, all my 22 years or 20 years by Lavan, and my journey towards Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, and towards my father Yitzhak, Meta alai Rachel. Rachel, my wife, unfortunately passed away. Where? On the road. It was still some kibrat eres. Most explain that to be a measure of land before the city of Efrat. So south, just south of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim, right before the city of Efrat. And I had to very sadly bury her there in this road to Efrat, which is known as Bet Lahem. And indeed, she's buried just outside the city of Bet Lahem. Why is Yaakov Avinu, in the middle of his conversation, deciding to convey that message to Yosef? It was not the topic. He was talking about the prophecy that God gave him and giving him great news about his sons, Menashe and Ephraim, that they would get their own portions as Yaakov's sons, equivalent, and about afterwards, subsequent to the pasuk we just read, to bless the famous blessing of Menashe and Ephraim. This pasuk was inserted in the middle. Now, the history that he just reminded Yosef of is almost verbatim during the actual incident, going back to Parashat Vayishlach, when tragically Rachel, during childbirth, got into a life-threatening situation. It says there, it says as they're traveling, and remember they were traveling from Padan Aram, from Haran, going through Israel to Hebron to eventually get reunited with Yitzhak. Listen to the term. A parcel of land before Efrat. And there it says, Rachel went into childbirth. She had great difficulty and she eventually passed away as or right after she had immediately after she gave birth to Binyamin, who would be Binyamin. Okay, so this is not news for us because it is almost a replication. It didn't mention Bet Lachem over there, but otherwise it's a replication of the same words. So, and you could assume that Yosef possibly even knew this history, as did all of the children of Yaakov. So what is, and he was there as a young boy. I don't know if you remembered it. Maybe you could have reflected on it. What's the purpose? His mother, his mother, dear mother who passed away. Why at this juncture is Yaakov bringing this up? So we have most of the Pashtanim, but she brings this down, even Ezra, Rashbam, telling us that Yaakov here is demonstrating what we see in last week's and this week's parasha, an astounding talent of Yaakov Avinu, of insight, of empathy, of perception of human nature. And here, with great sensitivity, he knows that he has already told in the previous conversation, Yosef HaSadik, his son, to go way out of his way. When he passes away, Yaakov, in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, they bring him northbound in a multiple day trip to bury him in Eretz Yisrael, in Hebron, in Ma'arat HaMachpelah, where his parents, Abraham and Sarah, are buried. And this is something that Yosef may very well, Yaakov, perceive, taken in a very personal way. Has v'shalom, we can say this, but let's just try to frame this. If it wasn't Yosef, what could have been an impression that Yosef got out of this command from his father Yaakov, the audacity. My mother passed away, and we couldn't walk the extra half mile to get into the city and bury her respectfully on the road she was buried. You're telling me to go out of my way and pull a tremendous political stunt and have to travel for days with a giant entourage to bury you? It doesn't match up. It's inconsistent. I didn't even want to use the word, but possibly contradictory, possibly hypocritical. And so Yaakov preempted those thoughts by saying, I understand what you might be thinking. You have to know that it went down this way. It was difficult. We had a family. We had many people with us. We had flock. There was just no way to do it. It was a surprise, but derech. I couldn't have anticipated this. Please understand. And so the great perception of Yaakov and his sensitivity, empathy for his son, he decided this juncture to convey this message. That explanation tells us why he said it, but doesn't explain why it was apropos in the middle in this very conversation in between those two Pesukim, because it sort of broke up the flow of ideas that he was discussing, which was Ephraim and Menashe. So we have to try perhaps to explore other answers. There's a unique theory that the Ramban brings up, that this explanation was also to tell Yosef why it would have been inappropriate for me to bury Rachel in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, wherein I was going to have my grandparents, which is Abraham and Sarah, my parents, Yitzhak and Rivka, and then me, already Leah was buried there, and a second wife. That is, to subsequent generations, something that could look not just awkward, but even disgraceful, knowing in the future what Torah law would hold. And therefore, although he did it permissibly, and therefore, possibly, he alluded to the fact that, I had strong reasons not to do this. In any case, we do find a few theories that explain not only this message, but the placement of this message. For instance, the Sforno explains that, and this goes well with the flow of Pesukim, that he was explaining why I'm making an extra tribe out of splitting your tribe, Yosef, into two, Ephraim and Menashe. Why is that necessary? If you wanted another tribe, you could have just had another kid. You need to get to the magic number 12, and Levi wouldn't be counted because of your futuristic insight. So have another child. And to that explain Yaakov, that it was not on the table anymore. My wife Rachel passed away. This was my beloved, my cherished wife. I was deflated, and my will to progress at all in life, but especially and to produce other children at that point in time was completely deflated. And so I had no thoughts at all. That was it. When Benjamin was born, I knew that was it. And therefore, he inserted this thought right here when explaining the division of Ephraim and Menashe. So that is really an explanation of why this is apropos right at this very juncture. There's other interesting theories as well. But what I want to go to right now is what we know as the most famous explanation of this pasuk. It's not the pshat, seemingly, of the pasuk, but it is a midrash. And the midrash brought here by Rashi is so fascinating because it's maybe the only type of midrash of its kind that behaves actually as a reflection of Pisukim. In other words, it's the event is not created by the midrash, but only really reflected upon historically by the midrash. What am I talking about? What I'm referring to is that Yaakov, according to the midrash, and this is first found in Midrash Rabbi, it's found elsewhere as well, conveyed the following, that he knew about the future. He was a prophet. He understood there would be a Khurban. There would be a destruction of the first temple that we just started to commemorate today on Asara B'Tevet. And that there would be a tragic exile of their children from their land, starting to go southbound to clear out of Eretz Yisrael. And that tragedy would be a point of depression forever for the Jewish people. And as the generation left, those who survived, exile, in disgrace and shock from their land as captives, they would pass this area on the road. And as they did, they would be able to pass their mother, Ima Rachel. And Rachel would pray for them. And Rashi records this midrash. And we have in it this idea that Rachel had a strategic placement by Yaakov Avinu for the purpose of comfort of a future tragic generation. Now, why do I say this midrash is unique? Because the midrash quotes a pasuk from Yirmiyah the prophet, who lived at the end of and through the destruction and warned about the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. And in one of the famous chapters of comfort in Yirmiyah, and we read this on Rosh Hashanah, it says as follows: Kol barama nishma. The pasuk said, Kol barama nishma. There is a sound, berama. Now, Ramah is actually a place in Israel, but it's not that close here to Bethlehem. It's a little distant. But a voice can be heard from afar, from a distance. Nihibechi tamhurim, with wailing, a voice of crying, bitter, weeping. Says, this is the prophet. This is not a midrash of Hachamim. Says the prophet Yirmiyah, Rachel mevaka al baneha. We know this pasuk. Rachel's weeping on her children. She was refusing to be comforted al baneha on her children. Ke'enenu. So the children are no longer there. The Pshadias explains the Radak that her children, Menashe and Ephraim, especially Ephraim, represented the kingdom of Israel, the leadership of the 10 tribes. And of course, they went into the exile years before, never to be seen for the most part again. And that could be the source of her crying. But according to the Midrash, it's also an extended crying years later in the kingdom of Yehuda and Binyamin, her other son, and that is in the exile of the Churban, the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. Responds Hashem. This is an amazing prophecy. God said, cease and desist from your crying, from your weeping. No more tears running out of your eyes. There's going to be reward for your actions, Rahel. And your children will return from the land of the enemy. There is indeed hope in the end, in your future. Your children will return here. It's a fascinating prophecy. What is this prophecy talking about? Rahel is not living anymore. Let's be real. There's no Ta'ayat HaMetim yet. And yet the Midrash says that Rahel is crying. What form does that take? When the Neshama exists, she's crying perhaps. This is a metaphysical phenomenon from the upper worlds, from a place in Gan Eden. We're being given insight from a prophet of a reality. And so the Midrash was not a possible picture painted, crafting this concept or idea. It's an actual reflection of a reality conveyed by the prophet Yirmiyah. And so that Yaakov Abinu, in his insight, understood that actual reality. In his prophecy, understood that reality, not just this concept and idea. And indeed, for that reason, and this is part of the message to Yosef right now, necessarily buried his wife on that road for future generations. We have another fascinating, famous midrash that in that first temple, when Menashe the king tragically placed a pesel, an idol, in the Beit HaMikdash, and God had it, and the forefathers went and presented themselves and plead before God, don't destroy your children. Avraham, Ishaq, Yaakov, Sarai, he turned them all down. And Rahel stood up and said, listen, I sacrificed everything. I sacrificed my husband. I gave the signs to my sister Leah. My life for my children. I died. I gave it all up. God, can't you overlook this? He said, Rahel, you are listening to it. For you, I'll give it. For you, I'm not going to destroy my children. Powerful midrash, also based on reality of historical events. And so Yaakov Abinu, telling Yosef at this point, knew exactly what he was doing and his foresight for the future. And from this becomes an actual explosion of sources that now build the mystique of Kever Rachel. We know from the Zohar. The Zohar tells us that there is no moment where Rachel is not crying for her children. This very reality that we were informed by the prophet is a constant reality. And that when her children are in Galut, Rachel is praying for the Geulah, for the future redemption to come, for the times of Mashiach. And her will is for her children to come join her doing that, and actually presenting themselves on her gravesite to pray for what she prays for as well. And more Zohar, and more Midrashim, and more mystique, and more tradition. And so look what we have today. We have hundreds of thousands of Jews picking up upon this, desperate people, women that want to have children, women that are suffering, people that are crying, Jews from all walks of life, observant, non-observant, in front of their mother Rachel, begging her to supplicate on their behalf and knock on the heavens door, shake the heavens, and change things for them. And all this started, look at this cycle of events, from the righteousness and kindness of her in her lifetime, from her great holy husband, Yaakov, realizing her power and having the foresight, not just to explain his son why he did it, but to strategically and painfully have to bury his wife there, understanding and knowing that his wife and the power and energy, not just of her life, but her afterlife, would be able to be a source of comfort for the future exiled, suffering Am Yisrael for many generations to come. A reality was born from a real, authentic, kind, powerful, spiritual life of a young woman, followed by an insightful, prophetic, brilliant life and strategic move by a husband. Then was born, conveyed to us by the prophecy of Yirmiyah, through tragedy, hope, and aspirations and comfort for all future generations to be able to join Rachel Imenu and prayer for our future Geulah, and to hear the response of heaven from for Rachel's pleas, and that is yes achar for olatech, yes tikva la'acharitech. There's hope. V'shavu bonim l'gvulam. He's saying children that left in tragedy and depression will return in happiness and joy. That is the mystique of Kever Rachel, and that is the incredible foresight of Yaakov Avinu. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.